Okay, I am going to read a little bit more of Elvis and Kathy. We are in chapter 4. So it's been a long time since I've read last, and I had to catch up myself. So basically, they were on tour in October of 70 and traveling to some different places, and they had for some reason they had some time off or something, and they were in Palm Springs, and he invited Kathy down to Palm Springs, and they had a big argument. Elvis, Kathy just was having a hard time being with a married man, and she was, had Christian morals, so it was really eating at her, which I totally 100% understand that. And she felt like she was committing adultery. And, but boy, does she love Elvis. She really loved being with him. And every minute she would be with him, she'd forget what she was doing. And then the next day she'd feel guilty and be depressed and all that. So anyway, she's in Palm Springs, and they had a flurry of emotion and lovemaking. And she sits up and says, "We have to stop this. I can't do it anymore." And Elvis is like, "What's this, sweetheart?" And he was surprised by the way she was acting, because he had always been open, and she knew exactly where he was, where he stood and his situation. And she said, "I just can't do this anymore. It's just really bothering me." And he said, "Well, does this mean I need to train someone else?" And she hit the roof, which I think any woman would, hearing those words. She flew off the handle, and it's like, "What? Train? Am I a puppy that you train?" I said, "You just need to find yourself another Gladys." And not knowing that was his mom's name. And he just sat there in the bed with his legs crossed, staring straight ahead with his mouth kind of tight in anger. Silent anger, she said. And then after she finally calmed down, she was pacing back and forth in the room. And he quietly but very hurtfully said, "My mother's name was Gladys." And she's like, "Oh my gosh, I did not know that. You've got to believe me." And so he looked at her really long and hard to see if she was telling the truth. And she said after a while they made up, and they apologized profusely to each other. He for saying the way he said it. He said, "I didn't mean it that way. It's not the way it sounded. The training. I'm not training a person. What it means is that it's hard for me to find someone that can get used to my lifestyle. Being up at night and traveling so much and all of that." So that's what he meant. So anyway, but she said he was different the next morning, and she flew back to Los Angeles, and then they started the tour. They went to a couple places, and things were like normal. And she was flying in his plane and staying in his room, in his rooms as they traveled around, and they got to San Francisco. And he was like, well, she said he took right before the show. Terrible timing, Elvis. But she had decided she wanted to stay in her room. And he was okay with that particular night, because she needed to sort out some things. So then, so she didn't see him again until showtime. And he took her face in his hands and looked straight in her eyes and said, "It's time, Minnie Mouse, it's time." And she was like, "Time for what?" He said, "Time for you to go to your own room, or stay in your own room." And then he walked away. Elvis did not like confrontations, but apparently he had another girl waiting for him in San Francisco. I'd love to know who it was. But anyway, she had to go out in the show, and she just realized that, what she had done. First she was mad and angry, like, what did I do wrong? And then she remembered Palm Springs. And but anyway, they still, after a couple nights, he wanted her back in his room. And so apparently he met a girl in San Francisco and probably flew down to the next city with her. And I feel like it may have been the girl from D.C., but I'll have to go look in her book and find out. I forgot her name all of a sudden, but she was from D.C. He met her in 69, August of 69, I think. I doubt it was August of 70 because that's when he met Kathy, and he was pretty much with Kathy that whole time. So I think it was in August of 69. It was right after he started going on stage. Anyway, we'll have to find out. But we are going to read this chapter, and I'll probably have to break it up because it is pretty long. I was trying to find where the next chapter starts, and I just kept going and going and couldn't find it. So anyway, chapter 4. So she starts out with, "My candle burns at both ends. It will not last the night. But ah, my foes and oh, my friends, it gives a lovely light." From Malay. Poet. What is it called? A poet? Yeah, a poet. Okay. "Much as I love flying, moving from city to city, and waking up in a new place every day, being on tour does sap the energy, causes health problems, and even fits of depression." So she's talking about her own self, and she's not Elvis. He's the lead singer. He's the main one. He's the one putting it all out there. He's the one interacting with the fans. He's the one that feels the responsibility of the show. And is it good? Do we need to make any changes? All of that. He is a conductor on stage in front of everyone. So he is really exerting energy and stressing over all the stuff. So you can imagine if it's hard for just one of the background singers, how it must be for Elvis. So do what she's saying times 10. "Sometimes I felt as if I didn't belong anywhere, and the only world I knew was a whirlwind of disconnected events, and this world was inhabited only by those people working with the show. On a long tour, we were in 21 different cities in 21 days. That means one night and then you fly. It's like 21 cities in 21 days. And some shows or places, they would have more than one show. They might have an afternoon matinee and then an evening show. So, we would move from time zone to time zone, losing track of days as well as places. It might be 9 a.m. in the city you departed, and still 9 a.m. when you arrive in the next city, even after flying for 3 hours. Being on tour has a multitude of problems one doesn't think of until you realize that during this period, you are actually homeless, rootless, where even the time of day seems upside down. I have said that traveling with the Elvis Presley show was a first-class operation, unlike many other tours I had been on. I think the credit for this goes to Elvis, who wanted the best accommodations for himself and his singers and musicians. Most of the people in the show were tops in their fields and demanded the best in working conditions while on the road. However, as the tour progresses, minor irritations build up and are magnified. There were no days off. On the 7th day, when we should have had time to rest, we did 2 shows instead. We did not eat properly, did not get enough sleep, and we just learned to live that way, but it wasn't healthy. Colonel Parker and his staff, leaving as usual one day ahead of us, checked out all the arrangements, including the theater, the hotel where we were to stay, the buses that picked us up at the airport, every little detail. And I also heard that, I think Sonny West went with the Colonel. I heard him talk about that one time, that he went with the Colonel the day ahead and checked out, all the security and checked out the paths that Elvis would take from his room to get to the downstairs and then to the car and then to get into the arena, and then you check out the arena. So like in a lot of the video footage of them on tour, you never see Sonny West. His cousin Red is there, but not Sonny, and that's why. I was like, well, that makes sense. You got to have the security ahead of time, knowing what to expect. And when he did this, talking about the Colonel, it was always his second trip to that city, because even before the tour began and after it was all mapped out, The colonel would hop on planes and go to every stop on the itinerary, reserving space in hotels and arranging for meals if that was necessary, and many times it was. For instance, if we were going to a college campus, these campuses are sometimes located in small towns that could not accommodate a sudden influx of 100 people. If you are surprised at the number that traveled on tour, remember there were the singers, the band members, the lighting men, the stage riggers, the sound men, the wardrobe people, and the hairdresser, all necessary in order to put on a quality show. And there's a lot of stage riggers. If we played in a small town, that meant double reservations, one hotel room in the city nearest the college, and another place to change in the college town just before the show started. In some smaller towns, the restaurants did not stay open late enough for us to eat, so the colonel or someone on his staff would try to make reservations for us at a restaurant, even if he had to convince the owner to open up especially for the show cast. And typically Elvis didn't go to that. I'm not aware of him doing anything like that. He would have to get takeout. Someone would have to bring him a burger or something. Right here might be a good place to confess my weakness for hot dogs. Everybody teased me about it, but hot dogs are just something I love. I tried them in every city, and even though the Chicago hot dog is famous, my vote goes to the hot dogs in Minneapolis and Milwaukee. I would rank Chicago third. Denver is almost a tie with Chicago. A funny thing happened during one of my hot dog binges. It was in Denver, and there was a long line waiting for hot dogs, and an Elvis imitator passed by, and everybody went chasing after him, and suddenly I found myself the only one in line. I guess it was because I knew the real Elvis was not even on the showgrounds yet. It passed through my mind that we should hire him to travel with us, and then I would never have to stand in another line for anything. My spirits had improved about going on the road again when I saw how the colonel and Elvis handled the moving of 80 to 100 people from one city to the other. The colonel and his staff handled a myriad of details. It was amazing how well everything was organized. We put our suitcases outside the door of our room and never had to worry about a thing after that. We just got on a chartered plane and took off. When we got to our destination, the colonel and members of his staff were always waiting there to give us our room assignments and keys, and then load our luggage onto a bus, which took us to the hotel or motel where we would be staying. It was nothing like the other tours I had been on, where you wrestled with your own baggage, struggled with music portfolios, helped the others with their gear, tried to find transportation, waited long hours at airports, and then found yourself either sleeping on a bus because there were no planes where you were going, or in some third-rate motel that had no idea you were arriving. I will say, as much as I hated being on the road, that when you travel with Elvis, everything was most always first class. He just wouldn't have it any other way. Taking care of his crew. But even relieved of all those details, touring around the country was still a grueling experience. Just a simple thing like getting laundry done required careful planning. I would study my itinerary and determine what city we would be in for a 24-hour period. In the meantime, I accumulated laundry and carried it with me in a plastic bag until we reached that city where we had a longer stay. Immediately, I would give my laundry to the bellboy, who would have it delivered to my room by the next morning before we left. Then there was personal grooming. I kept my hair cut short, but since it is naturally curly, I never had to put it up in rollers before the show or before I went to bed. All I had to do was use a hairdryer after washing, comb it out quickly, and I was ready. At least my hair was ready. No matter how many times you have packed a suitcase and how much experience you have had on the road, your clothes manage to get wrinkled. I always carried a portable iron with me just in case. The old trick of hanging the wrinkled garments in the bathroom and then running hot water in the shower with the bathroom door closed does create steam and does sometimes get the wrinkles in creases out, but some materials won't respond to the steam treatment, which means they have to be ironed. Like many people, I am sensitive to any change in the water supply. Water in one city might taste great, but it is treated differently, or perhaps natural contents of chemical treatments vary. So I learned to carry my own bottled water with me wherever I went. I tried never to drink tap water in a strange city, so if I didn't have bottled water, dehydration would result. There is also a theory that one should drink a great deal of water to help with jet lag, but I don't believe there's anything that really helps or works. Jet lag causes headaches, insomnia, a sense of disorientation, and extreme fatigue. Once you recognize the symptoms, you just learn to live with it the best you can. I know there are diets and preparations you can make to prevent jet lag, but most of those do not work on the road because you just keep changing time zones. Can't ever adjust. So listen to all this that she's going through. Elvis is going through it all too. For instance, one person suggested you stay awake while in the air. Another friend says to get 12 to 14 hours of sleep before boarding a plane. Yet another says not eating anything 8 hours before you travel is also a sure cure. Even my chiropractor got into the act when he told me to go barefoot and hold a tree in each city for 10 minutes, and then I'd be okay. But finding a tree in downtown anywhere in the USA is not an easy thing to do. None of these things is practical on the road when you are moving around the country so fast. I'm sure they have some merit for the casual traveler, but not for people who are averaging only 4 hours of sleep a night for 21 nights. Some of my best sleep was aboard a plane. There was no way I could stay awake. You have little control over the kind of food you are going to eat, so any special jet lag diet would only work for someone who takes a plane a few times a year. I may sound as if I am contradicting myself now because I said our luggage was always ready to go off to the hotel when we arrived. Not always. Once in a great while, something would happen and what does it say? She's got the wording wrong here. Once in a great while, something would happen and it would be en route. Once in a great while, something would happen, and maybe our luggage would be en route somewhere else or still sitting in the airport we just left. Now, if you have ever arrived somewhere without the things you packed, you know how inconvenient this can be. And if you are going to do a show in 2 hours or even sooner after you land, it is a catastrophe. So, to protect myself, I began carrying a small suitcase on board with me that contained an extra costume as well as makeup articles in case my own luggage was lost or misplaced. Smart. I'll never forget one day we were still sitting on the bus, waiting for the baggage to be transported from plane to bus. I looked out on the airstrip and saw some poor soul's suitcase come flying down from the plane's luggage chute, hit the ground, and split wide open. Clothes were everywhere. I feel sorry for that person, I said to James sitting next to me. Man, I feel sorry for that person. Then I recognized my underwear as the men outside were chasing it all over the runway. Gosh. Another time, we had along a horn player who was new to the group and not quite used to the routine. When he packed his bags an hour early for the luggage call, as was customary, he inadvertently packed his shoes and socks as well. His happy fate was to make the entire trip that day on the streets, in the airport, on the plane, barefoot. Another time, Donnie Sumner, a talented musician and vocalist who is now a minister, was late for the bus. In his desperate attempt to catch up with us as we were pulling away from the curb, gathering speed, he lunged over a hedge growing in front of the hotel. Donnie didn't make it. His foot caught up on the top of the brush, and he ended up doing a cartwheel trying to catch himself. By this time, We had brought the bus to a halt, and most of us were laughing hysterically until we found out that Donnie had broken his thumb. Actually, missing the bus was a fear we all lived with and had recurring, frustrating dreams about it. I think I would too. Oh gosh, if you miss that bus. And then you'd be late for the show. Oh my gosh. As for food, I also learned that it was either feast or famine. There were times when it was not possible to eat before or after a show because of the time schedules. So I had an emergency portable suitcase packed with soups, nuts, crackers. Now, with my emergency costume and makeup, my emergency food, and my 2 jugs of water plus a coffee pot, I was ready for anything. There were days I felt like a pack mule instead of a singer as I lugged all this from city to city. But it beat the alternative of facing hunger or worse, going on stage out of costume, which happened to me once. Eek! Please tell us the story. Oh, I can't forget my vitamins. I also carried a big supply of protein and various vitamins for every possibility. I think sometimes I took too many, maybe 30 a day. Oh my gosh! But I survived the road for 7 years with Elvis, 2 years with the Sandpipers, and 1 year with the Metropolitan Opera National Company, so I had to be doing something right. Oh, goodness. The show was usually over by midnight, and then we would eat and unwind before going to bed. We would have a 7:30 a.m. call to catch the bus to the airport. Oh my God, that sounds terrible. Because they probably weren't getting into bed until like 2 or 3 o'clock. 7:30, yeah, she said 4 hours. And even though we would leave orders with the hotel operator not to be disturbed, persistent fans managed to get through on the telephone and disturb our sleep. Though there were times when the singers and band members were separated. Usually they had the whole floor marked off for us, so we could all leave our doors open just before we got ready to leave. On Elvis's floor, also, the hallway was buzzing with activity, with everybody laughing and joking and wardrobe closets being wheeled away. Sometimes we might all gather around a TV set in one room, waiting for everything to be loaded. That sounds cool. When you're up in the room, in your hall, you had all your doors open, people coming and going. And same in Elvis's room. Soon Charlie would pass by the room. Okay, boss, everything's ready to go. The bags are all packed and everything's ready. Elvis would be standing there all dressed up, usually wearing a cape. He'd answer loudly, like an army sergeant's command. Okay, let's move it. Ho! Then the guys would respond with a yo, right back. Okay, let's move it. Ho! Army sergeant. I was standing there all dressed up, ready for his outfit, I guess, going straight, wearing his jumpsuit, all ready to go. We'd have to escape from the mobs of fans who were waiting outside the hotel kitchen entrance, or wherever we tried to sneak out. There would be a bus for the group and 2 or 3 limos and a police escort in front. We'd all pile into the vehicles. I'd jump into a limo with Elvis, and the screech of tires would be deafening as we peeled out with the car doors still slamming and police sirens starting to wail. When the motorcade reached the runway and stopped in front of Elvis's jet, we would hear the ear-splitting sound of fans screaming at the top of their lungs. Charlie and Vernon would board the jet first, while the other guys started loading baggage into the freight compartment. Elvis and I would pause at the head of the stairs while he turned around and waved back to his fans, who just went wild. Sometimes, despite the Colonel's organized strategies and the best-laid plans, quote unquote, we ended up doing some pretty fancy airline acrobatics. We'd fly in just an hour or so before the show, changing into our costumes on the plane just as the wheels were touching down. Then we'd jump into the limos, skip the hotel, and go straight to the auditorium, do the show, jump back into the limos, and take right off again for the next town, so we could sleep all night and be ready and refreshed for the next show. Wow. This could go on night after night. Often, at the end of the show, we would make a mad dash for the cars, and by the time Al Dvorin said, "Ladies and gentlemen, Elvis has left the building," we were already blocks away on our way back to the plane. Of course, when you travel, you're going to have some misadventures, and mistakes are going to be made. One of the funniest was in one of the larger cities in the downtown area. We pulled into the Hilton Hotel at 4 a.m. and were all dead on our feet. We all took our little packets with the room keys and marched through the lobby and up to our floor. Soon we were lined up in front of our respective rooms, but none of the doors would open. The keys fit perfectly, and we double-checked the numbers, but they just wouldn't turn the locks and open the doors. Big old 6'5" J.D. Sumner, who we affectionately called Jim Dandy at times, Jim Dandy, was road weary and saddled down with several bags and suitcases across his shoulders. He started grumbling and fidgeting, and his hair dryer fell and hit the floor. That's when he really lost his temper and sent his hefty foot crashing into the wooden door with a loud whack. It sounded like a cannon in the long, quiet hotel hallway. "What's wrong here? What's going on?" We were all frustrated and bone-tired. The door J.D. was trying to enter slowly creaked open, and a sleepy pair of eyes peered cautiously around the edge of the doorway. Other doors began to open, but from the inside. There were probably 80 of us simultaneously and sheepishly saying, "Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, pardon us. Please excuse me." Then we quietly assembled at the end of the hall, wondering what to do next. One of us had the presence of mind to inquire downstairs at the desk. "You're at the wrong hotel," he informed us. "What do you mean? This is the Hilton, isn't it?" "Yeah," he said, "but there's another Hilton 2 blocks away. That's the one you want." Oh my gosh. So they had their little packets with the keys already, I guess, in their hands. They didn't go to the front desk. They just went straight up to the floor. It's the wrong hotel. Oh my gosh. Confused, frustrated, and too tired to argue, our tribe marched on out into the night to find Hilton II. Neither Elvis nor I traveled well, but he had a lot more energy than I did. However, one thing that bothered both of us a great deal was the fact that irregular schedules and sleepless nights played havoc with our vocal cords. We needed rest and routine to keep our voices in shape, the same way an athlete does to keep in shape for athletic events. That makes sense. My father, as I mentioned earlier, was a professional singer and voice coach, and when he trained me, he always insisted I get 8 hours of sleep every night. Elvis would notice a difference in his voice, and so would I. However, Elvis could still do a lot more things vocally without getting proper rest than I could, since I am a soprano and the high, delicate notes go first. After a time on the road, there were parts of my voice that were just not there. I would have to wait until I got home and rested for a few days before my vocalization got back to normal. I kept telling Elvis how my father insisted his students get 8 hours of sleep a night. I also pointed out that when I toured with the Metropolitan, they insisted singers only do major roles once every 3 or 4 days, and to get at least 10 hours rest between moves from city to city. I kept after him to talk to Colonel Parker and set his foot down about scheduling so he could get the required amount of rest. Elvis talked to the Colonel, and soon it was arranged for Elvis to stay over in a city and fly to the next show just in time for the performance. Or he would fly on to the next city the night before, where we would find him fully rested when we arrived the next day. That's good. So they started redoing the schedules a little bit to give him a little more time off. No more 21 shows in 21 days, or 21 cities in 21 days, with probably more shows than cities. The Colonel was a businessman, not an entertainer, and knew little about voices and how delicate the vocal cords really are. When he scheduled the tours, it was obvious that he never considered singers, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know any better. And most business managers don't. Their concern is to make each concert pay for itself. The Colonel listened to him and made adjustments, but it was too expensive for the entire group to have the same arrangement. From time to time, the Colonel booked us into older, less than first-rate hotels, sometimes to throw the fans off our trail, and sometimes to repay a favor to an old buddy. It may have worked out well for his purposes, but wasn't always the greatest experience in the world for us, especially after an endless string of one-nighters. I was with the gang on the show bus in Cincinnati when we pulled into the driveway of a pretty creaky and spooky-looking hotel. Someone said, "Oh no, the Colonel's up to his old tricks again." After we were certain this was indeed the right place, we checked in. At about 6:30, we were back on the bus again, ready to head off for the show, when someone looked out the window and saw a man who looked remarkably like Elvis marching down the street wearing pajamas and a very determined look. Of course, the man we saw was Elvis, and later he explained to me what had happened. "Let me tell you something, honey. Sometimes those guys just don't understand me when I talk. I mean, I told him flat out to get me out of that flea bag." Oh my gosh. I wish I could hear Elvis talk like this. "Let me tell you something, honey. Sometimes those guys just don't understand me when I talk. I mean, I told them flat out to get me out of that flea bag. But I guess they all figured I was just talking to keep myself company. So finally, I just got up and split right out of there. When we happened to play..." So he left. He just left, still in his pajamas. Oh, gosh. Oh, my gosh. I guess they got him up, picked him up. When we happened to play in small towns and about 100 of us walked into a restaurant at one time wanting breakfast, we sometimes pitched in and helped the restaurant cook. Well, isn't that cool? The cook needed help, and so did the waitresses, because they weren't set up for that big an influx of people all at one time. We would run around with paper and pads taking orders, or help fry the eggs, make omelets, pancakes, and pour coffee. Everybody got into the spirit of the occasion, and we all had fun. It was a real change from room service and a lot of laughs. I think that would be fun, because everyone's on the same page, you know. They're a team trying to help out, because they understand. For a change of pace, Vernon and I managed to get out several times and buy pajamas for Elvis. He favored a particular style, one example being powder blue with navy piping. Staying 5 weeks in Vegas, I always felt as if I was serving a jail sentence in a very elegant, posh institution. I would rather be traveling than living like a prisoner, looking at 4 walls. So she's giving her point of view, but it is also Elvis's point of view, because she has more freedom than he does even. People aren't going to, well, if people recognize her, they'll probably come up, "Oh, I want to meet Elvis," but he can't get out. But she said she and Vernon got out to buy some pajamas for Elvis. If cleanliness is next to godliness, then I was angel material on the road. I took a shower when I got up, a shower before the show, or when I got to the hotel, and a hot bath after the show. The hot lights and the wild performances made a bath after each show imperative. So I took 3 to 4 baths a day. How clean can you get? And there are more health problems on the road. We moved fast and ran into every imaginable climate extreme. We would be in air conditioning, smoke-filled, humid arenas or auditoriums. Oh my gosh, because people smoked. Ugh, can't even imagine that now. The world we live in now is so smoke-free that if you are not a smoker, you just are very sensitive to that smell now. And just, back then, I was little. I grew up with both parents smoking and going to ball games with my dad where you couldn't smoke inside the stadium, but you could on the concourse. The concourse was just filled with cigarette smoke, and you're walking out, walking in, that's all you smell. And you see the videos of Elvis in the room, his rooms, and people are smoking and stuff. That probably wasn't good for the vocal cords either, but, they didn't know back then how bad smoking was for you. So let me go back to this. We would be in air conditioning, smoke-filled, humid arenas or auditoriums, cold auditoriums. We'd be in air conditioning, smoke-filled, humid arenas or auditoriums, cold auditoriums, freezing or boiling hot dressing rooms, and then into snow, followed by a day in a tropical climate. All of this can lead to a sinus and bronchial infection, the worst version of which is commonly referred to by entertainers as Vegas throat, the most feared enemy of any singer. Elvis and I used his prescription Decadron inhalers to help clear our lungs and open the bronchial passages. So you see him using those in some of the video footage of him before a concert. And he's even talked about Vegas throat on stage before, talking about how dry it is. The most feared enemy of any singer. Elvis and I used his prescription Decadron inhalers to help clear our lungs and open the bronchial passages. And probably other people did too. And, this is part of when they talked about Elvis or Dr. Nick, right, having all these prescriptions written in Elvis's name and, and them traveling, they would take all these prescriptions for everyone on tour to have. So probably the Sweet Inspirations, some of the J.D. Sumner and the Stamps, the background singers, some of them may have used this stuff too. So Elvis had a lot of prescriptions written in his name. It did not mean that he took all of them. When they're like 10,000 prescriptions, that's because they basically traveled with a pharmacy to help everybody, all the singers. And, the people that are doing the stage preps, all that stuff, everybody. She said 80 to 100 people. So that would open up the bronchial passages. But then, one time, Elvis introduced me to the funniest remedy. He called them saltwater douches. Now, to everyone outside the world of professional singers, this remedy will appear somewhat crude. However, vocalists have to learn tricks in order to keep going night after night. The first time he introduced me to this cure was in Las Vegas. Sorry, my eye's itching. Okay. "Come here, Stuffy Nose," he said as he led me into his bathroom. Both of us sounded as if we had our nasal cavities full of cotton. "Man, I am miserable. My throat is as raw as a skinned rabbit. How about yours? But I have something that'll fix us both up," he mumbled. skinned rabbit. He grew up sayings that you get in the South. My throat is as raw as a skinned rabbit. How about yours? But I have something that'll fix us both up, he mumbled. Now watch me, he demonstrated. You sprinkle salt into a glass of warm water like this. Here you go. One for you, one for me. Then you pour a little of it, swirling the glass around, into the palm of your hand. I copied his actions. Then he went on with his treatment lesson. Now, get ready. You inhale this shit up your nose like this. Bend over, quick! We both leaned over as far as we could, and if you want to know the truth, it burned like hell. Hold that position, baby. It burns, but hold it. Now blow your nose in the sink. Now follow me. We got to exercise hard and fast. Ride this bike, the exercise bike. Soon, all that junk is going to break loose and your nose will open up. That was the Elvis stuffy nose treatment, and by golly, it worked. Temporary relief, but still it worked. Sprinkle salt into a glass of warm water. Then you pour a little of it into the palm of your hand. Then he went on. Now get ready. You inhale this stuff up your nose like this. Bend over quick. We both leaned over as far as we could. And if you want to know the truth, okay, so I guess their head was like down to the ground. Hold that position. It burns, but hold it. Now blow your nose in the sink. Then you lift your head up. Go blow it in the sink. Now follow me. We got to exercise hard and fast. Ride this bike. So I guess they kept doing it over and over again until their nose cleared up. Oh my gosh. I can remember standing on cold stages where the lower part of me was freezing and the top of me was burning up from the lights. The Colonel and Elvis always allowed audiences to take flash photographs, and while we stood there freezing and suffocating simultaneously, thousands of flash bulbs with their intense bluish-white light went off continuously for over an hour and a half, bringing on partial blindness for several hours after the show was over. I kept seeing black and red spots before my eyes I kept seeing black and red spots before my eyes, even when I was in bed trying to go to sleep. But there is even humor in chaos. Thousands in the audience had binoculars to get a better look at Elvis. When we looked back at them and the light bounced off those binoculars, Elvis decided they looked like frogs out there staring at us. It truly was a peculiar sight. Oh my gosh. You know, those people out there with binoculars look like frogs. I love hearing these stories because you're really getting a picture of what it's like to tour with him, the things that can happen, good or bad, people getting left behind, including the main star attraction, or not liking the Fleabag hotel he's in, what they are experiencing when they're on stage, the different climates, how it can affect you, and the things they do in the hotel room. So you can also see why Kathy was such a good friend of his, because she did all this stuff with him, so he could teach her and share, experiences and things that he had to do with her, things he learned, tricks that he learned. So it's just, I'm so thankful that God put Kathy in Elvis's life so early on in the tour years, so she was there for him for a lot of good and a lot of bad. And they got very close when they had their relationship, and that closeness remained even though they went separate ways. He still had her company with him. I don't think I'll ever forget one night in Jackson, Mississippi, We'd just been in tornado weather, and when we got to the auditorium, when we got to the auditorium, it was real hot and humid and muggy. They'd left all the doors open to let some air into the place, and there were hundreds upon hundreds of flies swarming and circling in the bright lights in the center stage all around Elvis. Oh my gosh. He was trying to be real cool about it and ignore them. But I was afraid he was going to inhale or swallow or choke on all those flies. I noticed a man standing just off the side of the stage with a fly swatter. I walked over and got it from him, and while Elvis sang, I began to swat at the air, at Elvis, hitting as many as I could. I tried to make it look like a joke, and he played it up with me, but I was serious. He could have easily inhaled them. Gross. Kathy out there swatting flies while Elvis is up there performing. She was even swatting the flies that were landing on him. But he played it up because she was probably acting funny to try to make light of it and make it look like a joke. But everybody knew those flies were out there. Although the flies were more of an isolated experience, one thing we encountered everywhere we went was the overwhelming noise level. The unbelievable noise from the screaming audience, which sounded like thunder and felt like an earthquake on the stage, combined with the band music coming out of the monitors, would cause a temporary deafness in my ears each night when the show was over. Oh, and going back to the bright lights, and Elvis had glaucoma. They diagnosed it in 1969. Pretty sure it was 69. And that's why he would wear, it looked like sunglasses all the time, but it was lights that would protect his eyes. They were prescription, that protect his eyes from the bright lights, even inside. So he wouldn't wear those on stage. So those flashing light bulbs were terrible on his eyes, terrible. And, as the years went on, he would have to put cold compresses on his eyes after the show. And as you notice in the later years, he starts closing his eyes a lot while he's on stage. A lot more than the early years. And that's why, because all those bright lights, the flashing are going off all the time. All of this physical abuse is bound to take its toll. Once in Vegas, I had the London flu so bad I could not leave my bed for several days. I worked when I should have been in hospital, where I would have been if I had had any other kind of job. But in my business, the show must go on. I wonder why, after all these years, we in show business foster that attitude. We aren't doing ourselves any good. We are ruining our health now and for the future. We are doing it for our fans, but wouldn't our fans rather forego seeing a performance just once in order to assure we all be available for a longer period of time? Of course, this is just wishful thinking on my part. Many of Elvis' fans came from far and wide just to see him perform live once. People who had been listening to his records for years. They came for a date with him, and he could not and would not break that date with them, no matter how poorly he felt. Although he had congenital physical problems, I know his life on the road contributed to his eventual ill health, and I know what it has done to me. I think this show business philosophy is something that needs to be reevaluated. The show must go on, but it should never be at the expense of putting a performer in an early grave. You said it, Kathy. Should never be at the expense. One saving grace is that we never flew commercial airlines. Elvis' own plane, the Lisa Marie, named after his daughter, was elegant, done mostly in blues and greens, and a lot of high-quality suede. Oh, yes. Now, he didn't get that until 76, but they flew charter flights. Okay, Lisa Marie had a kitchen and a comfortable lounge area. He had a bedroom and dressing room on board. They were at the back of the plane. Elvis had both the Jetstar and the Lisa Marie well stocked with Tootsie Roll Pops, bubble gum and chewing gum, and Pepsis. The Jetstar had a cup next to each window, and the Lisa Marie had a cup about every other window filled with plenty of these goodies. He looked so cute whenever he flew, rolling a Tootsie Roll Pop around frantically in his mouth, causing the protruding stick to dance in circles. Elvis was also a voracious gum chewer, always very active and physical about it. And he knew I hated old, already chewed up gum and would sometimes surprise me by hiding it in special places, like on my microphone, on stage. So he chewed bubble gum. Yeah, I've seen him chewing gum before. But sucking on a Tootsie Roll Pop, I wonder what was his favorite flavor. I was partial to the orange and grape, but I also liked chocolate. Not as so big in the cherry, but I would eat a cherry. I wouldn't put it down. But the grape and the orange are typically my favorite. But boy, I love the chocolate one every now and then. Perhaps the most elegant of all the leased planes was one that we used for several tours that belonged to McCulloch Corporation called the Starship. It had a black and gold marble fireplace in one of the bedrooms. This is one of the most elegant of leased planes that they used. A fireplace in a bedroom, brass-colored mirrors, modern suspended chairs, a dance floor complete with an organ, a game room, and fabulous gourmet meals. I don't know how they did it, but whatever you wanted to eat seemed to be available. There were also several monitors so that movies could be viewed in any of the rooms. This plane was often used by such stars as Elton John, Olivia Newton-John, and several others who loved luxury while touring from city to city. The Starship had plush East Indian tapestries, and a warm suede on some of the walls, long couches covered in a velvet paisley, and was very roomy. It was my favorite, although Elvis was so proud of the Lisa Marie that I never told him that. I didn't mean to leave the impression that we always had a posh plane for the show people. We didn't. It depended on what kind of deal the colonel could get and how a particular plane's rental itinerary fit into our own schedule. We most often used the Holiday Airlines Electra jet. It was not luxurious, but it was the most comfortable. We would remove the armrest and sleep across 3 seats with room to spare. Anyway, all of the planes were really more comfortable than any first-class commercial airliner, and it made flying a very pleasurable experience. That's nice if you have a whole row to lay out on. She said these seats were so wide that 3 seats gave her extra room to spare, even after she stretched out. There was a period in Elvis's career, however, when he never flew. He had a big motorhome or bus that was outfitted with every luxury. But then there were so many places to go in such a short time that flying became a necessity, and it was more economical in the long run because there could be more shows in a shorter span of time. However, by the time I had joined the tour, Elvis was flying on leased planes and eventually bought his own. He told me many stories about the old days on the road by bus and car. Sometimes I think he missed it, because he talked to people he could never reach from the air, and that bothered him. I think he felt more in touch with my kind of people, as he called them, when he was in a motorhome, bus, or car. My kind of people. It's always felt like I was his kind of people. Earlier, I mentioned the Holiday Airline prop jet, but I didn't mention that I had a dream about this plane before I ever set eyes on it. What was peculiar about this dream is that we had been flying in a DC-9 up to that time and had never been on a prop plane, so I don't know why my dream would have been about prop planes. I dreamed the night before we left that this prop plane was flying along and all 4 engines stopped. It was a real nightmare. When I woke up, I remember thinking how foolish the dream was because we never flew on a prop plane, so the nightmare meant nothing. When I arrived at the airport, imagine my horror to see we were flying on a prop jet. It was the same plane I had seen in my dreams, and this did not make me feel very comfortable. We left Los Angeles, stopped in Las Vegas to pick up some band members, as we usually did, and then when we got over the Grand Canyon, one of the engines died. Believe me, I was holding tight to my seatbelt by that time until my knuckles turned white. For some reason, probably out of panic, I thought this would help when we crashed, which I was certain would happen any second. The pilot turned around and headed back for Los Angeles instead of Minneapolis, where our show was booked. It took us 6 hours to get from Los Angeles to Los Angeles. It took us 6 hours to get from Los Angeles to Los Angeles safely without incident, thanks to a very cool pilot. All we could do while we were flying back to Los Angeles was to sit around the plane's emergency exit, tell jokes, and pass the bottle back and forth. The bottle. John Wilkinson, Jerry Sheff, Estelle Brown, Myrna Smith, Glenn D. Hardin, and I listened with relief to James Burton's stories about cars. This was one time we were glad to listen to anything and keep our minds off the ground thousands of feet below. It was a crazy time and the conversation was weird, but all of us were so relieved. So that was the guitarist, the bass player, 2 of the suites, the soprano, and the piano player, and the electric guitarist. However, that isn't the end of the story. We got on the plane 11 hours later and still in Los Angeles and headed for Minneapolis once again. This time around, the radio went out. We crept into Minneapolis very slowly and just made it in time to go to rehearsal the next day. Those of us from California had not seen a bed for 2 days by this time, and we were so tired we could barely get through the rehearsal. I remember being so unstrung that I cried during rehearsal while singing How Great Thou Art. We went right on to a matinee and then an evening performance. I still don't know how we managed to do it without collapsing. She started crying during How Great Thou Art. I had told Estelle Brown of the sweet inspirations about my dream before we ever boarded the first time in Los Angeles. When the engine stalled over the Grand Canyon, Estelle laughingly told everyone, "This girl is a witch. Believe me, she is a witch." After that, they teased me about knowing what was going to happen, but sometimes I got the feeling that some of them thought I really was clairvoyant. Another time, we were taking off from the Burbank airport on our way to Fresno, and one of the engines blew apart. There was no fire, and we landed safely, but I sure remember that one very vividly. The entire side of my plane window was black with slimy oil. That was one time I flew from Burbank to Burbank in just 10 minutes. Wow. Years later, we had another close call going into Roanoke, Virginia. Everybody was asleep but myself and Ronnie Mabe, a keyboard player for the Stamps. Ronnie was sitting with me and we were talking. Suddenly, the chartered prop plane took a sharp, steep dive to avoid a small plane. Nobody had their seatbelts fastened. Luggage and people went everywhere. I thought, this is it. We are going to die. I remember crying. Ronnie started saying, "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus," over and over. But the pilot managed to get control of the plane and we landed safely. Nobody was seriously injured, and I thought that in itself is a miracle, considering how hard we bounced around. There were other close calls, but these are bound to happen when you are flying half the year in all sorts of weather, using planes that might not be as carefully checked by mechanics as some commercial airlines are checked before takeoff. Most chartered planes do not have all the inspections required of commercial airliners either, so I believe chances of mishaps are much greater on chartered planes. Looking through my scrapbook, I discovered the itinerary for a typical 2-week tour written and sent to us by Colonel Parker's office. Reading it over, I wonder how we ever survived the 21-day tours. Okay, I just looked and we have a lot more to go. So I'm going to wait and pick up this in another reading. So we'll start at the itinerary for a 2-week tour, which apparently, because Kathy's looking at it, said, she's like, how in the world, because this is probably sounds crazy, because she's thinking, how in the world do we survive a 21-day tour? So we'll start with that in the next reading. All right, I hope you enjoyed it and learned a little bit about what it's like to be on the road for any musician or singer. But this one was with Elvis, so we get a little bit of Elvis sprinkled in there, some Elvis experiences. Him putting his chewing gum on Kathy's microphone. Oh my gosh, he's so silly. All right, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.